In 2005, a neuroscientist at Massachusetts General Hospital brought brain scans into her lab, scans taken from a Tibetan monk who had been meditating for 60 years. The monk was 74. His cortical thickness in the regions responsible for attention and working memory matched the baseline of someone more than 30 years younger. Not a figure of speech, not a marketing headline, documented MRI data published in the journal NeuroReport. The researcher's name was Sarah Lazar. She wasn't looking for that result. She came to disprove what she herself considered an exaggeration. What she found redirected her work for the next 2 decades. Every 4 seconds, somewhere in the world, one person receives a dementia diagnosis. The World Health Organization projects that by 2050, more than 150 million people will be living with Alzheimer's or another form of cognitive decline. In the United States, Alzheimer's is already the 6th leading cause of death. The cost of dementia care exceeds $300 billion a year, more than the combined spending on cancer and cardiovascular disease. And on the Tibetan Plateau, at 4,000 meters above sea level, in villages without a single pharmacy, without a single neurologist, without a single nootropic prescription, elderly residents remember the faces of people they saw once, 40 years ago. They solve complex logistical problems. They teach children and grandchildren traditional knowledge. They stay sharp at 80 and 90 without anything the health industry sells for brain protection. Same biology, same species, dramatically different outcomes. In the next 20 minutes, you're going to learn exactly what's happening in the brains of Tibetan centenarians, why Western neuroscience is only now beginning to decode that mechanism, and how to build the same system into your daily life, starting tomorrow morning. And at the end, you'll learn about one habit Tibetan elders never have, a habit most of us consider a completely normal part of life, a habit neuroscience now directly names as one of the primary accelerators of brain aging. You'll want to stay for that. But first, before we get to what Tibetan centenarians do, we need to talk about what they don't do and what you're being sold instead. The brain supplement industry is currently valued at over $7 billion a year. Omega-3 in capsules, phosphatidylserine, ginkgo biloba in tablets, nootropic complexes with impressive names. The sales logic is simple. Take a compound that's present in a healthy brain, isolate it, put it in a pill, get the protective effect. Sounds reasonable. The data don't support it. In 2015, a research group at the University of Eastern Finland completed one of the largest randomized trials of omega-3 for cognitive health in older adults. 2,533 participants, 5 years of follow-up. The result? No statistically significant effect on cognitive function. 0. The study, published in JAMA Internal Medicine, closed that question for any honest scientist. And a 2012 meta-analysis in the Annals of Internal Medicine, covering data from more than 3,000 older Americans, found that regular ginkgo biloba supplementation didn't reduce dementia risk. No difference from placebo, over 8 years of observation. Tibetan monks and elderly residents of high-altitude villages in Qinghai Province and the Kham region don't know what nootropics are. They don't have access to those capsules, and they don't have the money for them. And their brains continue to function with a clarity that, by Western standards, should be considered impossible at their age. It's not the supplements. It's the system they build every single day. The first tier of that system, the foundation, is physical movement. Not at a gym, not on a schedule, as part of life itself. Imagine dawn on the Tibetan Plateau. The air is thin, cold, and transparent, -15 outside. An elderly shepherd rises at 4 in the morning, as he has every day for 70 years. He lights the stove, prepares sampa, roasted barley flour mixed with hot yak butter. Then he goes outside, climbs a rocky path to the livestock enclosure, hauls weight, spends several hours in continuous movement across a steep slope. Before the sun is up, he's covered 3 or 4 kilometers at 4,200 meters above sea level. This isn't a workout, it's just life. Now here's what's happening in the brain during that kind of movement. Physical exertion stimulates the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Neurobiologists call it fertilizer for neurons. It literally supports the growth, survival, and formation of new synaptic connections. In 2011, Kirk Erickson and his team at the University of Pittsburgh published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences involving 120 older participants. 2 groups, aerobic exercise 3 times a week or stretching only. After 1 year, the aerobic group showed a 2% increase in hippocampal volume, the region of the brain critical for memory and spatial orientation. The stretching group saw it shrink by 1.5%. 2% growth against 1.5% loss. In neuroscience, that's called a significant effect. In life, it's the difference between someone who remembers where they left their keys and someone who starts forgetting their neighbors' names. Altitude adds another layer. Moderate hypoxia at high elevation triggers adaptive cellular mechanisms that, at the neuronal level, act as additional protection against oxidative damage. A study from Qinghai Medical University, published in 2019 in Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience, documented that residents of the Tibetan Plateau over 70 had significantly lower markers of oxidative stress in the brain than lowland residents of China of the same age. Not slightly lower, significantly and measurably lower. The Tibetan shepherd doesn't know the word hippocampus, but he knows that after a morning in the mountains, his head is clear, that he remembers who owes what, who came by yesterday, what he promised his son last week. The body tells him the truth about what the brain needs. Here's what Tier 1 looks like in practice. Step 1. Physical movement every day, not 3 times a week. The consistency is what creates a sustained baseline elevation in BDNF. 30 minutes of brisk walking on uneven terrain produces a comparable effect to what Erickson measured in his study. A hill is better than a flat path. Taking the stairs is better than the elevator. The difference isn't in the load, it's in the stimulus. Step 2. Movement before breakfast. Tibetan shepherds go out to work before eating, not because they understand autophagy, but movement in a fasted state amplifies autophagy in neurons, the process of intracellular housekeeping for which Japanese biologist Yoshinori Osumi received the 2016 Nobel Prize. The brain literally clears itself of accumulated cellular debris, including toxic protein aggregates directly linked to Alzheimer's disease. Step 3. Right now, not tomorrow, right now. Stand up and walk at least to the end of the block and back. One walk won't change anything, but a first step followed by a second, a third, a 100th, that's what changes the brain. Starting the ritual matters more than doing it perfectly. What comes next is the layer that even people who know the BDNF research tend to miss. It's diet. Specifically, food without a pro-inflammatory profile. The staple food of the Tibetan Plateau is tsampa, roasted barley ground into flour and mixed with hot yak butter and pocha, the Tibetan salted tea. Not refined white starch, whole grain with a complete package of fiber, beta-glucans, and slow-releasing carbohydrates. Yak butter is rich in conjugated linoleic acid and fat-soluble vitamins. Fermented barley and lacto-fermented vegetables give the gut a probiotic load that Western people try to replace with probiotic capsules. What's absent from this diet matters more than what's in it. There's no refined sugar, no vegetable oils with a damaged fatty acid profile, no ultra-processed products with added flavor enhancers that disrupt satiety signals, no hidden sugar in dozens of forms under hundreds of names on ingredient labels. In 2020, researchers at Peking University published a meta-analysis in Aging Research Reviews on inflammation and cognitive decline, covering observation data from more than 1.4 million people. The central finding? Chronic low-grade systemic inflammation is an independent predictor of cognitive decline. Not a correlate, an independent cause. That means diet maps the trajectory of your brain separately from every other factor, separately from genetics, separately from education, separately from social engagement. Inflammation in the brain isn't abstract. When C-reactive protein, the marker of systemic inflammation, is chronically elevated, it literally compromises the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. Molecules that shouldn't enter brain tissue start getting through. A 2021 study in the Journal of Neuroinflammation found that in older adults with chronically elevated CRP, the risk of accelerated cognitive decline was 2.7 times higher. Not somewhat higher, 2.7 times. The Tibetan diet wasn't built around inflammation theory. It was built around what grows and lives in the mountains. Barley, yak, wild herbs, root vegetables. Minimal processing. Not because a nutrition textbook said so, but because there was simply nothing else. The result? An inflammatory profile that Western neuroscience now calls optimal for brain protection. Here's what Tier 2 looks like in practice. Remove refined sugar from breakfast. Replace a carbohydrate-heavy breakfast with something built on whole grain, quality fats, and protein. Whole oats with nut butter and eggs is the closest Western equivalent to Tibetan tsampa with yak butter. Add turmeric with black pepper. In 1998, Shoba and colleagues in Planta Medica documented that 20 milligrams of piperine from black pepper increases curcumin bioavailability by 2,000%. Not 200%, 2,000. One ingredient completely transforms the bioavailability of another. A quarter teaspoon of turmeric and a pinch of pepper in your morning meal isn't a social media ritual. It's biochemistry confirmed in peer-reviewed literature. Now, the habit. The one habit Tibetan elders never have. Most people, when they hear about cognitive aging, assume one of three things. It's genetics, or it's diet, or you need the right supplements. All three answers are incomplete. Because the most powerful accelerator of brain aging isn't what's written in your genes, and it isn't what you put on your plate, it's what happens in your mind in the gaps between eating and sleeping. The habit Tibetan centenarians don't have is chronic mental rumination. The compulsive cycling of anxieties, regrets, grievances, and catastrophic scenarios about the future. What Western people call just normal thinking, ordinary stress, the kind of worry everyone has. This isn't a philosophical observation. It's physiology with specific molecular mechanisms. Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University spent more than 40 years studying what chronic stress does to the brain. His team documented a direct causal link. Chronic elevation of cortisol, the primary stress hormone, literally shrinks the hippocampus. Neurons lose their dendritic branches, synaptic connections weaken, neurotrophic factor production drops. The brain ages at an accelerated rate, not figuratively, measurably, on MRI. In 2018, Alyssa Eppel and her team at the University of California, San Francisco published a review in Nature Reviews Neuroscience, covering data from more than 200 studies on stress and brain aging. The conclusion was unambiguous. Chronic psychological stress accelerates the biological aging of the brain, predictably, measurably, and independently of other factors. Let's return to Sarah Lazar and her 2005 Harvard study. She and her team at Massachusetts General Hospital compared the brains of people with long-term meditation practice, average experience of 9 years, with a control group of the same age. The result? Meditators had significantly greater cortical thickness in the prefrontal cortex and insular cortex. In one participant, a monk with 40 years of practice, the cortical thickness in the regions governing attention and interoception matched the measurements of someone more than 30 years younger. Not somewhat better, 3 decades younger, by objective neuroimaging data. Tibetan elders don't call this meditation in the Western sense. For them, it's simply part of the day. Morning prayers, mantra, periods of silence. The Buddhist practice of observing thoughts without latching on. A thought arrives, you acknowledge it, and let it go. You don't unfold it into a story. You don't turn it into a regret or project it into anxiety about the future. For a Tibetan monk or an elderly farmer from the Kham region, the ability not to ruminate isn't a spiritual achievement. It's a skill taught from childhood, the same way they're taught to sow barley or find a path in the mountains during a snowstorm. Here's why this works at the cellular level. When the mind doesn't latch onto anxious thoughts, cortisol doesn't rise chronically. The hippocampus doesn't receive toxic load. BDNF continues to be produced at normal levels. The blood-brain barrier stays intact. Autophagy in neurons runs as it should. The glymphatic system, the brain's nighttime clearance mechanism, operates more efficiently at low stress levels. Each of these mechanisms is documented independently. Together, they form a system of protection that Tibetan communities have been building for generations. A meta-analysis of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn at the University of Massachusetts, published in the journal Mindfulness in 2021, and covering data from 6,500 participants, found that 8 weeks of practice at 45 minutes a day reduced levels of C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, those same inflammatory markers that compromise the blood-brain barrier, in a statistically significant and reproducible way. Mindfulness practice directly protects the brain by reducing systemic inflammation. That's not a soft effect. That's physiology. Here's what happens to your brain when you implement this system consistently. In the first week, many participants in clinical programs reported improved sleep quality, not necessarily duration, specifically quality. Slow-wave sleep, the phase during which the brain's glymphatic system is most active and clears accumulated metabolites, deepens as baseline cortisol drops. If you have a smartwatch that tracks sleep stages, you'll see the shift in your data within a few days. By the end of the first month, if you run a blood test for C-reactive protein before starting the practice, and again after 30 days, the Kramer et al. 2017 meta-analysis in Brain, Behavior, and Immunity documented statistically significant reductions in inflammation markers among regular mindfulness program participants. This isn't abstract movement. This is a change in the environment your neurons live in, every hour of every day. At 90 days, structural changes in the brain begin to register at precisely this time frame. The brain is a plastic organ. Neurons that fire together wire together. Neurons that stop receiving a chronic stress signal rebuild their dendritic connections. It's not fast, but it's measurable. The Lazar et al. And Erickson et al. Studies show that sustained daily practice over several months is associated with measurable structural changes in the brain at multiple levels, from molecular to anatomical. CRP will show the inflammatory dynamic in response to changes in diet and stress. HbA1c will show how blood glucose stabilizes when you move from refined carbohydrates to whole foods. Both markers are directly tied to the trajectory of cognitive health over the long term. The system of Tibetan centenarians has 3 tiers. Tier 1. Daily physical movement built into daily life, ideally before breakfast, ideally on uneven terrain. Not for strength, for BDNF, for autophagy in neurons, for a hippocampus that grows rather than shrinks. Tier 2. A diet without a pro-inflammatory profile. Whole grain instead of refined carbohydrates. Sugar eliminated. Turmeric with black pepper. Not because they're superfoods, but because chronic inflammation compromises the blood-brain barrier, and whole food keeps that door closed. Tier 3, and this is exactly the one Western people almost never put first, is a daily practice that frees the mind from rumination. Silence before breakfast. observing the breath. The Buddhist tradition of non-violence toward your own thoughts has refined this skill over 2,500 years. 21st century neuroscience has confirmed the mechanism. Chronic stress shrinks the hippocampus, and regular mindfulness practice slows that process and compensates for it. Tibetan elders aren't avoiding aging. They're living by a system that doesn't allow the brain to age at the rate Western medicine has come to expect. Not supplements, not expensive protocols. Movement, food, and silence. Every day, all life. We take nootropics instead of changing our rhythm. We look for a pill for stress instead of learning not to ruminate. We load the brain with information noise 24 hours a day and wonder why it wears out ahead of schedule. Here's one concrete action for tomorrow morning. Before breakfast, before you open your phone, before you turn on the news, before you start running through your to-do list, sit quietly for 5 minutes. Just observe your breathing. Don't control it, don't count. Simply notice the air coming in and the air going out. When a thought appears, acknowledge it without latching on and gently return to the breath. 5 minutes. Not because it's a spiritual practice, because it lowers cortisol before a meal, improves the quality of your night's sleep, and gives your hippocampus one morning without chronic stress load. That's not magic. It's simply returning the brain to its factory settings. After 5 minutes of silence, go for a walk. 20 minutes. On a slope if possible, or at least the stairs instead of the elevator. Then eat breakfast without refined sugar, with turmeric and black pepper. This isn't a complete life overhaul. It's one morning. Tibetan elders made that kind of morning a daily habit. That's what makes their brains different from ours. Yes, they have genetic adaptations to altitude, but the foundation of their health is a system they build every day, one that nobody sold them, one they inherited as part of their culture, and one that neuroscience now describes in the language of cortisol, BDNF, and cortical thickness. If you want more systems from the longevity traditions of Asia, subscribe to Longevity Path. Every week, one tradition, one science, one concrete step. Drop in the comments which of the 3 practices you'll try first: movement, food, or silence. I read